Welcome to AlexGs Aquarium, everybody. Today will be part 2 of the DIY needle wheel impeller series. In the first part of the video series, I did a comparison between stock impellers and my DIY needle wheel impeller. I did a little demonstration on it, and then the final step that I did was to remove the stock impeller from the impeller shaft of the pump that I'm going to be using for the needle wheel, and that's a Jabo 15,000 pump. In this video, we're going to be taking the first steps of making the actual discs for the needle wheel impeller. And I'm going to go through step by step in as much detail as I possibly could as to how I made these discs as the next part of this video series. Let's go ahead, jump into the DIY process. I hope you guys enjoy today's video. The first step to building a DIY needle wheel impeller, once you get the original impeller off, is to determine what the max diameter is going to be, which is your whole width across here. Now, I've already built one of these impellers for the Jabo pump, and this is the original water flow pump that was on there. You can see right here. I had a little bit of extra room inside the pump housing to where I could put a little bit larger needle wheel in. And this is something that you'll have to play with a little bit depending on the pump that you're going to be using. In this case, I've got another hole saw which I was able to drill out a slightly larger hole. And this is one of the test ones I used to verify that in fact this would fit inside the pump while it is all enclosed. I drilled out a hole for the shaft so I could push this over that and just rotate it around in there to find out if it's going to hit any obstructions. It's very important that along the way, every time you do a step in this, you take a pause in each step, put it onto the pump as best you can, and measure to find out, are you doing things correctly? That's going to go for the size diameter of the impeller disc. It's going to go for the height of the needles that you put on your needle wheel. And it's really important step, so take your time with this. Don't feel you have to rush through it and build this all in one shot. Now, I'm going to build an impeller just like the impeller that's on my Jabo 15,000 right now, and it's a double-sided needle wheel impeller, meaning that there's a thicker bottom disc I made out of 1/4 inch, and then there's a top disc of acrylic that is made out of a thinner material. This is only right about 1/8 of an inch thick. That's going to be the top plate. I've got this clamped down. I'm going to go ahead, get this drill plugged in, and then we're going to cut through our first hole. It's important when you're drilling acrylic like this as a loose sheet and we're trying to get this disc out, you have something behind it to kind of brace it, especially with a drill press. That way it doesn't tend to shatter the acrylic. Let me get this drill plugged in, get my safety glasses on. We'll go ahead and drill out this first disc. I prepared 2 of these thin 1/8 inch discs, which will be the top cover for the needle wheel impeller. They're not completed yet, but I at least have these done. Since I have this bit on here already, I want to take this piece off, put my thicker material on, which is the 1/4 inch stock, and drill another 3 of these out at least, maybe 4. But we're going to have some extra to work with. Now, 2 small pieces, 3 thick ones, so I can make 2 of the double plates I already have, and then I can make 1 more experimental kind. I'm done with this drill now. I can go ahead, take this whole thing off. I still have to do a little extra machining though on these because I have to cut a larger hole out of them. I've set the drill up again for the next part of the needle wheel impeller. Now this is the thinner 1/8 inch piece, and I have to cut another hole out of the center so that it is similar to the impeller that's on the pump now, so that water can get sucked in here to go through the needles that'll be around on the outside. I've set one of these up. I have sandwiched this piece of acrylic between a little piece of wood here and a bigger chunk of wood. I've already lined it up. I've used this jig before to make my previous one. Now it's just a matter of going through and drilling this out without cracking the disc. Looks pretty good. Got it pretty much dead center on there. Not exactly perfect, but pretty darn close. This is the easiest thing to do here. This now is all squared, is all set up to now go on top, so water will intake through here and go out the sides. By having this done, it'll also allow me to understand where my outermost edge of needles has to be in the subsequent layers after. One more of these to make. With all these discs now drilled out for the needle wheel impellers, it's time to now start drilling the holes for the needles themselves. This is a little bit more of a tedious process, but it's not that difficult. We'll walk everybody through it. The setup for this isn't too complicated. I'm going to start off by making up the disc that's going to just have straight needles sticking out of it, so everyone gets an idea of how I'm going to do that. And then I'll go on to this other needle wheel design here, which is a little bit more complex. It's going to be pretty easy for everybody to see how this is done. Let me get a couple things set up here, and we'll start talking about how that process is completed. With all of the acrylic discs cut, we're ready to move on to the next step, which is going to be getting the holes drilled to accommodate the acrylic rod that I purchased that will actually be making the needles for the needle wheel. I'm using Plastra acrylic rods. You can find them at hobby stores online. I have purchased their 1/16 of an inch and 1/8 acrylic rods. I like them because they are pretty accurate as far as their measurement goes, because this is where the type of acrylic rod you get can kind of be critical, because you need to have something that's going to accommodate the drill bits that you're going to be using. When you purchase this stuff, the next thing you really have to figure out before you start drilling holes is what size drill bit can I use. The only way to really do that is to take an acrylic rod out from each package, so you have one at each size you're going to be drilling, and then you need to make some test holes. Don't assume just because it says that it's in 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch, that size drill bit is necessarily going to work with this stuff. Some of the manufacturers for this stuff aren't always completely accurate. They might say about 1/8 or about 1/16. Well, unless you have like a full machinist drill set and you have every tiny little size, it might not work out so well for you. These I actually found out work pretty good. I want to make some test holes on my 1/4 inch piece of acrylic so that I know exactly whether or not this is going to fit when I start drilling the hole pattern onto the disc. Now if you want, you could set this up in the drill press to make a test hole. For me, a hand drill is just going to do the same exact thing. It's got a nice snug fit in here. I could insert it into this little hole without too much pressure being needed. You want it to have a nice snug fit so when we bond this in later, it's not going to be kind of flopping around all over the place. Now I'm going to try the same exact thing with a 1/8 inch drill bit. There you go. Nice snug fit, not getting hammered in there or anything. The one thing you got to watch with acrylic when you drill it, it is going to get some melting in it depending on the drill bit. If it's got a nice snug fit though, that's okay. Now the reason I'm really telling everybody to be careful with buying an acrylic rod for this is I bought some other acrylic rod that was labeled as being 1/8 of an inch. Well, guess what? It was about 1/8 of an inch and it doesn't fit. And while I do have a machinist drill set, the drill that I need for this, I don't have it. So this stuff's not going to be very useful to me. Luckily, it's not expensive. I'm not worried about it. I went and bought the stuff that I used the first time around, which was what I should have done in the first place. Now that we have this figured out, we have to take the next step of figuring out, well, where exactly are we going to put the holes in this? How are we going to do that? Now, to build this out, when you're first starting it, it's a good idea to get a piece of plywood or even just a regular piece of wood. I got a 3/4 inch piece of birch plywood I had scrapped from building the tanks, and this is going to act as my template guide. And the reason I like to make something like this up is that instead of making one of these and losing all your measurements, I made one and I wrote down all my little measurements on here that have references for me to be able to drill the pattern out for this. It's going to be real simple to get the pattern drilled on this. We're going to start with a standard needle wheel impeller, which is one that just has 1/8 inch needles sticking up straight from the face. Then I'm going to move on to making one that has a double half on it, where it's an 1/8 inch row of needles followed by two 1/16 inch rows of needles, and finally an inner ring of 1/8 inch needles on it. The biggest thing to remember when you do this is just like any other circle cutting jig. You need to have a point of center. Now we have that when we drilled this out, but you need to have a screw or a bolt or something that's going to fit relatively snug in the hole that you drill. In this case, I have this screw which has got a pretty big diameter on it, and it fits real nicely in here and doesn't really move around a lot. And I'll screw this into the piece of wood just to hold it down so that I could rotate my acrylic around it as a guide. And I'll set the camera up here when we get the drill set up so you can see exactly how that's done. This is going to be a real simple jig. I'm going to go ahead, get the drill press all set up here. I'm going to pull up one of the other needle wheels that I'm going to do this exact same style. I drilled the pattern on it, but I ran out of acrylic rod, so I never finished it. I want to use that as a reference just to make sure everything's lining up. We'll start drilling this first pattern out, see if we can't get through a couple of these tonight. I want to start with this basic one, and then we'll move on to the more complicated one that's a double layer impeller. I now have the acrylic disc set up on my template here. It's lined up for the first outer hole, and I'm just going to drill each hole and then spin it slightly and then keep drilling. Now I put a pencil mark here, which is going to be the indicator for how far I want to put the next hole. This was the first one I did, which I never finished this one, but you could see that I had the holes spaced out in a pattern all the way around here. And that is going to be the exact same thing we're doing here as the first step in this process for a basic needle wheel impeller. There you have it. The first outer row for needles is all drilled. I'm just going to simply move this upwards just a little bit that way. We'll repeat this process for the next 3 rows of needles on the impeller. Line this up for the second round here. Same thing. You could still use your pencil line as a guide here, but a lot of this is just keep an eye on the spacing. If it doesn't look like it's going to work, then make it a little wider, a little narrower. Just remember, you want to have at least a little bit of a gap between them with these 1/8 inch. And this is just a good tip. If the drill bit starts to get jammed up, use something like a pencil or a little piece of wood or a dowel or plastic, or just shut the drill off and clear the bit manually. You never want to touch your finger. The drill's unplugged right now, so it's not going to turn on. But never put your fingers on the drill bit to try and clear it off. It could just wind up being a really nasty accident, especially if it jammed your finger between the bit and the screw here. And safety first with all this stuff, of course. All 4 rows have been completed. Now we're not done yet with this. We still got another step to go. Right now we have ourselves a nice little acrylic disc here with 4 rows for 1/8 inch needles. And you could use something smaller than this. We're going to for the next impeller. But consider this if you're going to make one of these. That is that the needles are going to have to be strong enough to take the force of the water standing straight out. That's why I went with 1/8 inch on this. For the second needle wheel impeller, We're also going to ramp up the difficulty of this a little bit. I've showed you guys when I made the discs for the other ones that we had to kind of have a 2-disc sandwich on here. We got to be really careful with that when we start to drill holes. I'll show you guys why in a few minutes. The final step that you're going to have to take on this, and I'm not going to do it yet, we'll talk about it a little later, is the center hole here is not big enough. It needs to be re-drilled in order to accommodate the impeller shaft. In this case for the JBO 15,000 pump that I'm running. But we're not going to worry about that quite yet because I want to get all of these done with all the patterns, and then we'll work on getting that piece done, as it is a little bit of its own topic. Just so everybody's aware too, time-wise, it only takes a few minutes to drill this up. Most of it is setting up and getting some measurements. Yeah, I eyeballed this. I didn't use, you know, anything to make a drill hole pattern, and I don't feel that it needs to be that machine precision for what we're doing. It's in a magnetic pump housing. It's going to be getting mixed with air and water, which is already going to be throwing off how it spins to a certain degree. And this impeller's whole point is to not have a lot of resistance. It's not going to be spinning at some ridiculously high RPM either. Balancing is not going to be as big of an issue. That's why I'm making it this way. If you have a 3D printer at home, hey, that's great. You could probably make these a lot easier than I can. But I really wanted to show if you got some tools at your house, and if you got like a little drill press, some hole saw bits and some drills, acrylic and acrylic glue, you can make your own DIY needle wheel impellers. Now we're moving on to the next needle wheel impeller, which I'm going to picture. That needle wheel impeller is going to be a little more difficult, and we're about to find out why, because we have 2 discs. We have our bottom disc, which is still made out of 1/4 inch acrylic, and then I have a top plate that is going to go on it like a little sandwich that is made out of 1/8 inch acrylic. We also talked about it earlier, is drilling out the center here so that the water has a suction point into this sandwich here. This is where you got to be careful though. Having it set up this way is great, but we have to make sure that when we drill a hole pattern in this, we do it perfectly between the 2 halves here. If you don't, the acrylic won't align. We're talking about a ton of holes, probably well over 100 holes we're going to drill in this. If they don't all align, well, I'm sorry, it's just not going to work. I'm going to show you guys some tips though, how we're going to do that. The first thing I'm going to have to do though is we need to get 4 holes drilled between these with them secured together. And secure them together as best I can. We're going to set them up in this jig, get them lined up for the first set of holes, and we're going to drill 4 holes. And I'm going to put them like a north, south, east, west, and across. Those are then going to have an acrylic rod put through each and every one of them as they're drilled. That will serve to ensure that these do not shift from each other. And it also ensures that all the holes that are going to be drilled in here are going to align with each other. So when you pass the acrylic rods through that are acting as needles, they'll all line up perfectly when it's offset. Ready for the next step. I've removed the protective plastic from that side and also this side. There's a couple of ways I could have done this. I probably took a little more of a difficult route. Instead of cutting through this disc and cutting out the inner part like I did earlier, I could have double stacked it on top of this with 1 single screw, drilled through each one of them to put in some pegs. I'm just going to use some 1/8 inch acrylic that'll fit this normally, just to hold them together as a placeholder. I'm going to do 4 total, 1 on each corner. And that will allow me to have this all held together as one piece, so it should not be able to shift at all once these are in there. Unfortunately, because of the way I did this, there's not going to be a simple way to do this. What I'm going to do here is just line it up by hand, hold it down with my hand, and then just slowly drill this. Once I get through it, I'll then be good to go on putting the first peg in. Notice you're going to get some acrylic in here. That's okay. You're going to get this happening a little bit more as we go through all this. Now I kept the protective plastic on one side and off of the other. I did that on purpose just so that it's a little easier to identify each piece. Let's go through. Tap that in, and now we have one corner of it secured. You can see though we're still a little wobbly, and that's what we want to try and eliminate here. We go to the complete opposite corner here. Do the same exact thing. With this, now you have your two discs interlocked together. I know they're kind of touching here, so we'll trim them up a bit. Okay. I'm going to spin this all the way around. Important thing to do with this, once this is in, is do not, for any reason, remove all four of these pegs. If you have to remove them, make sure that you use some kind of marker or something to mark one of them, if not two of them, to let you know which one is what. I'm going to do the same exact thing now that I did before. We're going to drill a whole series of holes all the way around here. And the next fun part, alright, the 16th inch drill bit has been installed now. And yes, I'm sorry, if you're going to do this, this is probably the most tedious and annoying part of this whole build here. You're going to be drilling a lot of holes. That is how you drill all the holes for one of these double layered needle wheel impellers, and also a single layer needle wheel impeller. Still got a lot of little pieces of acrylic in here when I was drilling through. Some of the cuttings got between the layers. That's okay, don't worry about it. We can clean that out in a little bit. The first thing though we want to do is just disconnect this. There it is, the start of this. This is a ton of holes to drill, but hey, it does work pretty good. With this all complete, the next thing we have to do is drill out the center hole to fit the impeller shaft. I'm gonna do that once I get another one of these ready to go. I don't want to set up to do it until I have everything done and I'm ready to do the next step. Once those are drilled, then we move on to attaching the needles to the needle wheel impeller. Finally, we'll do some assembly and testing. That wraps up part 2 of the DIY needle wheel video. I hope everyone enjoyed today's content. If you did like today's video, go ahead, give me that thumbs up. Let me know I'm doing a good job. If you didn't like today's video too, it's okay. Go ahead and give me a thumbs down, that's alright. Of course, this is a DIY project. I know I tried to put as much detail into it as I could, but I'm sure ultimately there could be a lot of questions people can have. So by all means, please leave your questions and comments down below. I'll try to get to them as soon as I can. I always try to answer the questions as best I can when I have time. Again, thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you on the next video.